Welcome back to another video tutorial brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com. Today we're going to be using oil pastel. We're going to be drawing an apple. I'm going to start off by just drawing a shape for my apple, and I'm just going to use a basic red. It'll be a primary red. This apple is going to be a red apple, so I'm going to start off with a red color. And I'm just very loosely making the shape of that apple. I'm not trying to get the details perfect. I'm using very loose strokes with my hand. You can see the way that I'm holding the pastel. I'm just putting down information on the apple a little bit at a time. Now I know my light source is going to be coming from the upper left hand side, so I'm going to go ahead and start putting in darker values a little bit on the bottom part of the apple. I'm just going to let that red be a little bit more intense on the bottom left hand side of the apple. And as I get close to the ridge that goes around the top of the apple, I'm going to stay away from that a little bit right now because it's where my highlight's going to go. Now I'm going to get a red-orange color and start making that red just a little bit more intense. Oil pastel techniques are very similar to colored pencil techniques. You're going to want to layer your colors and mix your colors, of course. You want to slowly build up the color so that it looks like paint. Taking your time is important. And if you, well, with colored pencils you should outline last. If you like to outline with oil pastels, it's similar. You define the outline at the end. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow ochre, and I'm going to start to go over some of those colors. Yellow ochre is a lighter value, so I'm going to let it go up to the top of the ridge a little bit. And as I'm working, I'm going to put a little bit more pressure on the material and let some of the colors start to blend. I'm working from the left to the right, trying to keep in mind where my light source is coming from. An apple has really bright highlights depending on your light source, and in this case my apple is going to have really bright highlights, so I'm being careful that I don't cover those up right off the bat, so I'm being aware of where they're going to be. Now I'll go back with my primary red, and I'm going to let some of those colors blend a little bit more. By layering these colors, we're creating colors that are more natural. They're going to be more intense, and it's going to add in that painterly feel that we want in the finished image. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of white, and I'm going to start to define where those highlights are going to be. Just a little bit. We'll go back with the white later, but right now I'm going to just give myself a little bit of indication where those highlights are going to be. Oil pastels are definitely a drawing media, although a finished oil pastel image would be referred to as a painting because of the way it looks. Alright, now I'm going to take a little bit of blue, and I'm going to start to define some of my shadows a little bit. You'll remember that the light source is coming from the left side, so to indicate that I'm going to put some of that shadow on the right side of the apple. And you might be asking, why are you using blue? Well, blue is a cool color. Our highlights in this image are going to be warm, so when you've got cool and you got warm, it increases that contrast a little bit. Also, shadows are black, I guess, but you don't really want to use black. You'll notice that I don't use black at all in here. Instead, I'm going to use blue and now brown. And when I mix the brown with the blue, it's going to make more of a natural black. You want to try to avoid using black as much as possible, except when mixing. And I try to use black. I try not to use black at all. Try to use blue and brown to mix my blacks. So that brown's going to mix real nicely with the blue. And we're going to define a little bit of that shadow. And you might be thinking, boy, that's an intense contrast there between that red and that dark. Well, it is right now. And what I'm going to do when we get the shadow on there is soften up that little intersection between the midtones and the dark values. With right now there's a hard contrast. So I'm going to take my primary red, go back over the top of those shadows a little bit, and let those midtones be midtones. Let them be the connection between the highlighted side of the apple and the highlights on the apple and the shadowed parts of the apple. Now that will tone down our shadow just enough. We do want contrast to be there. And we do want the shadow to be intense, just like we want the highlights to be intense, but we don't want to lose our midtones. So I'm going back over some of those areas with that primary red. And then again with the red-orange. At this point, our image is really starting to look painterly, starting to look like it's been painted. You always have the option of using a little bit of thinner and going over this with a paintbrush and mixing those colors right there on the surface. For this demonstration, I am just going to be using the oil pastels. And that's going to tone down our contrast a little bit, but preserve the intensity of the shadow that we want. Alright, now I'm going to take a little bit of yellow-green and hit little areas of the apple. There is a little bit of green in the apple that I'm using, so I'm going to indicate that a little bit with this yellow-green. And what happens is when I make my strokes on the apple, the yellow-green actually digs into the surface a little bit and makes the green feel a little bit more natural. So this brings us to the end of part 1. I hope you'll join us for part 2.